As promised, here is a quick overview of Paradise Lost Book 2, which will culminate actually in a slightly slowed down reading of an important passage near the end when that recounts sort of the comic book style, the origin of Satan in heaven, when he first falls, and sin begins to exist, born parthenogenetically out of Satan's brain. So the book begins, with a council in hell. It begins with a speech from Satan to all the assembled devils, basically saying, "What shall we do?" And this is where he talks about how he'll be the king, he'll be the highest because he'll be their protector, and he'll stand between them and the Thunderer. Right? The Thunderer is a nice bit of classical humanism, by the way, at line 28, right? Because you would think of Zeus or Jupiter, but here it's being used to refer to the Judeo-Christian God. So he calls for counsel, which is typically the thing that you expect a good king to do in all the sort of political treatises and handbooks from the Middle Ages through the Renaissance. A good king rules by counsel. This is actually in the Bible as well. And there's wisdom in many counselors, says Proverbs. So he's going to hear sort of advice from different members of his evil cabinet, if you will. And they're going to enjoin him to various courses of action. First, Moloch, right? The deity worshipped by the Philistines in the Bible as this fierce god who children were sacrificed to. And Moloch's very clear here. He says at line 51, "My sentence is for open war. Of wiles more unexpert I boast not." I imagine a big sort of, I'm not off for thinking, let's just attack them, right? And what is his reasoning? What is his logic? Well, what are we going to do? Just sit around here and do nothing? The hell with that. Sorry. Yeah, he's okay, so what that God beat us once? What's he going to do? Put us in hell? And what's he going to do that's worse than putting us in hell? Annihilate us? I'd rather be annihilated than endure eternal suffering anyway. So what have we got to lose? Let's sort of be strong and tough and macho and honorable, and let's just head right back to heaven and try again, even though we got our butts whooped once. He says, "If our substance be indeed divine," line 99, "and cannot cease to be, we are at worst on this side nothing, and by proof we feel our power sufficient to disturb his heaven, and with perpetual inroads to alarm, though inaccessible, his fatal throne, which if not victory is yet revenge. If we cannot achieve victory, at least we can leave heaven with no peace." We can, just be continuously, sending our forces just so that they always have to stay on watch. And he ended frowning. Here's the narrative commentary. "And his look denounced desperate revenge and battle dangerous to less than gods." And then we get, in contrast to Moloch, who's let's go get him, attack, kill. We get Belial, who's "Moloch, you have no chill." On the other side, uprose, line 108, Belial, "an act more graceful and humane." I like that word humane there, right? It doesn't mean what we think it is, but sort of associated with the ideas of humanism, I think, and cultivated, urbane, civil, polite is how it's glossed in your book. "A fairer person lost not heaven. He seemed for dignity composed and high exploit." Right? He's this real courtier type figure, right? He's civil and composed and he's graceful, but all was false and hollow. Line 112. "Though his tongue dropped manna and could make the worse appear the better reason, to perplex and dash maturest counsels, for his thoughts were low, to vice industrious, but to nobler deeds timorous and slothful." So he seems like this chill guy who's really diplomatic and nice and he's got good manners, but he is afraid and he is lazy, and he is going to use rhetoric, the power of speech, right? The power to make the worst argument appear better, to basically say, let's not do anything to anger God more. Let's just do our best do our best down here in hell. Maybe God will forget someday, or his anger will lessen, and we can just sort of like escape from his view. Why would we want to risk more anger from God? Why would we want to risk annihilation? He's like, yeah, living in eternal torment in hell sucks, but honestly, I'm more afraid of not existing at all. I would rather be than not be, which is very interesting. Thus Belial, line 226, clothed in reason's garb, with words clothed in reason's garb, counseled ignoble ease and peaceful sloth, not peace. And after him thus Mammon spoke. Now you may remember Mammon if you're a Bible-reading person. Jesus says you cannot serve both God and Mammon. And Mammon is a symbol of wealth. He's a symbol of worldly riches, right? And his idea is basically like, well, why do we want to bother messing with God or not messing with God at all? Let's just make hell really nice. Look, it's full of gold and treasure. And this is an interesting thing, too, the idea that hell is full of wealth. And in one sense, this is a classical reference, right? Because who's the god of the underworld in classical mythology? Pluto, Hades, right? Who's also associated with wealth and riches. And this is because where does gold come from? Well, quite literally, the underworld. And the ancient Greeks imagined that the underworld was literally under the world, as did medieval Christians. It's really sort of Milton in the Galilean universe who's trying to grapple with like hell and in outer space, and Satan having to like travel through space to get to Earth, and Earth is tied to heaven on a golden chain before the fall. It's all very cosmic and science fiction. All right, I'm gonna have a drink of coffee here. Got my Missouri State Online thing on brand still. This is one of the best pieces of swag I ever got because it's actually it actually keeps my coffee hot. It's a beautiful thing. Okay, so what's Mammon proposed? Mammon's like, let's just make hell really nice. I imagine like him like sort of wanting to like Minecraft hell and like make all these like palaces and like let's just make it as beautiful as we can. But all of this has been for show. It's all been nonsense because Satan and his number 2 guy Beelzebub already know what their plan is, and this is all just sort of like to get the devils to buy in, right? And what's the plan? Well, I've heard rumor in heaven that God is creating a new world with a new race of people, and what we can do, even if we can't beat God in open war, is we can ruin his plans by finding these new people and turning them to our side and corrupting them. But what we have to do a scouting mission first to find out who's going to do that. Well, says Satan, I'll do that. And everybody else is like, yeah, that's cool, you do that. Everything that Satan does, in a sense, is a parody of Christ. It's a mockery. It's derived. And this relates to Christian ideas that evil has no positive being of its own, that it can only ever steal, it can never create. And so this idea of Satan, leaving hell to go to earth to corrupt and damn mankind is going to be countered in Book 3 by Christ, who will offer himself up to sacrifice to redeem mankind, and ruining Satan's plan, and not only ruining Satan's plan, but making the ultimate outcome better than it would have been in the first place, so that Satan's desire to take the good of God and sort of corrupt it and make it worse, what God's plan is, who has foreseen this, is to take that attempt at evil, and out of that evil bring a greater good. Ultimately, and this is part of the whole justifying ways of God to man. But if you're interested in Satan's, this idea of Satan's incarnate, the idea of Satan sort of coming to the world as a parody of Christ, look at line 404 in Book 2. Who shall tempt with wandering feet the dark, unbottomed, infinite abyss, and through the palpable, obscure, find out his uncouth way, or spread his airy flight, upborne with indefatigable wings over the vast abrupt, ere he arrive the happy isle. What strength, what art can then suffice, or what evasion bear him safe through the strict sentries and stations thick of angels watching round? Here he had need all circumspection, and we now no less choice in our suffrage. For on whom we send, the weight of all and our last hope relies. This is Beelzebub talking about Satan, right? Like, all our hope rests in this one creature who's going to go and is going to do this, and he's going to go on this great mission. And of course, there's, again, the parody of the idea of hope. There is no hope in hell. Dante Alighieri puts over the gateway to hell, abandon the hope, all ye who enter here. So that's Satan, and he's on his way. And meanwhile, we get a kind of parody of what it's like to be a damned person on earth. For people who are, sort of lost to God and Jesus and religion. I think we get from like 558 to 569 and 648 to 659. We see demons doing things that are remarkably human. Some of them are sort of thinking around and talking intellectually about philosophy. Others are making poems and songs. Meanwhile, Satan's going on his quest, and at line 648, he meets sin and death at the gates of hell, and he does not recognize them. The figure of sin is based on more traditional medieval images. This idea that, wow, I gotta read this to you. It's just too vivid. The one seemed a woman to the waist, and fair, but ended foul in many a scaly fold, voluminous and vast, a serpent armed with mortal sting. About her middle round a cry of hellhounds never ceased barking, with wide Cerberian mouths full loud, and rung a hideous peal. We're at line 656. Yet when they list, would creep, if aught disturbed their noise, into her womb, and kennel there. Love that verb, and kennel there. Yet there still barked and howled within unseen. Far less abhorred than these, vexed Scylla, bathing in the sea that parts Calabria from the hoarse Trinacrian shore. Epic simile, epic simile, epic simile. So that's sin, right? She's got all these like serpents around her middle sections, and then all these hellhounds that come out of her nether regions and then go back up there and devour her from within while barking and howling. I mean, it's grotesque, right? And it's meant to be a kind of an imaginary representation of the idea of sin itself, right? That sin destroys the sinner in a way from the inside, and that sin may seem fair above, but is foul beneath, right? And then the other creature is the other shape, line 666. If shape it might be called, that shape had none distinguishable in member, joint, or limb, or substance might be called that shadow seemed, for each seemed either. Black it stood as night, fierce as 10 furies, terrible as hell, and shook a dreadful dart. What seemed his head the likeness of a kingly crown had on. Satan was now at hand, and from his seat the monster moving onward came as fast with horrid strides. Note the way the rhythm picks up there. The monster moving onward came as fast with horrid strides. The sound is echoing the kind of idea that they're charging at each other. Hell trembled as he strode. The undaunted fiend, what this might be, admired. Admired, not feared. God and his Son, except created thing, naught valued he nor shunned, and with disdainful look thus first began. Whence and what art thou, execrable shape, that darest, though grim and terrible, advance thy miscreated front athwart my way to yonder gates? So Satan is here saying, who are you? Get out of my way. He's talking to death, and they got all angry with each other, and they're about to fight until this hideous woman form intervenes at line 727 and says, "O Father, what intends thy hand," she cried, "against thy only Son?" again, that parody of the divine that we see in the evil, in Satan. What fury, O son, possesses thee to bend that mortal dart against thy father's head? And know'st for whom? For him who sits above and laughs the while at thee ordained. Where was I? At thee ordained his drudge to execute whatever his wrath which he calls justice bids, his wrath which one day will destroy ye both. Sin is not deluded. She spake, and at her words the hellish pest forbore. Then these to her Satan returned. So yeah, sin is basically like, hey, don't destroy your son. You'll just make God laugh, who's going to destroy you both one day. And so as she speaks, and then Satan's basically like, who are you? I don't recognize you. Why are you calling me? Why are you calling this phantasm my son? You're detestable. You're gross. Go away. And to whom thus the portress of Hellgate replied. Portress is a gatekeeper, right? And I love the idea of sin as the gatekeeper of hell. She says, hast thou forgot me then? It's a little touching. And do I seem now in thine eyes so foul, once deemed so fair in heaven? When at the assembly, flashback, and in sight of all the seraphim, with thee combined in bold conspiracy against heaven's king? This is a flashback to the moment when Satan falls, when Lucifer is no longer an archangel, but the enemy of God. All on a sudden, miserable pain surprised thee. This is where Stanley Fish gets the title of his book, Surprised by Sin, right? Sin is surprising. All on a sudden, miserable pain surprised thee. Dim thine eyes, and dizzy swum in darkness, while thy head flames thick and fast threw forth, till on the left side, opening wide, likest to thee in shape and countenance bright, then, shining heavenly fair, a goddess armed out of thy head I sprung. Now, those of you who know your Greek mythology will recognize this as riffing on the birth of Athena from the head of Zeus, what's called parthenogenesis, right? But here, it's sin being born directly from the head of Satan. Amazement seized all the host of heaven. Back they recoiled afraid at first, and called me Sin. And for a sign portentous held me. I love the connection between sin and sign. This, you can get all sort of post-structuralist on that. And I'm going to pass over that for now, but get on Slack or discussion if you want to follow up on that. But familiar grown, I pleased, and with attractive graces won the most diverse, thee chiefly, who full oft thyself in me thy perfect image viewing, becamest enamored. So sin pops out of Satan's head. He sees her, and everybody's like, so what's that at first? And then she starts to please him. She seems beautiful to him. And he sees in her, there's a kind of weird narcissistic thing going on, his own perfect image. And it also becomes incestuous, right? The primal sin. Becamest enamored, and such joy thou tookest with me in secret, that my womb conceived a growing burden. So Satan has sex with sin. Meanwhile, war arose, and fields were fought in heaven, wherein remained for what could else to our almighty foe clear victory, to our part loss and rout, through all the empyrean, that's another word for space and heaven. Down they fell, driven headlong from the pitch of heaven, down into this deep, and in the general fall, I also. All the devils get kicked over the side of heaven, they go, and there comes sin a little bit after. And in the general fall, I also, at which time this powerful key into my hands was given, with charge to keep these gates forever shut, which none can pass without my opening. Pensive here I sat alone, but long I sat not, till my womb, pregnant by thee, and now excessive grown, prodigious motion felt, and rueful throes. So she goes into birth pangs. At last this odious offspring, whom thou seest, thine own begotten, breaking violent away, tore through my entrails, that with fear and pain distorted, all my nether shape thus grew transformed. But he, my inbred enemy, forth issued, brandished his fatal dart made to destroy. I fled and cried out death. Hell trembled at the hideous name, and sighed from all her caves, and back resounded death. All right, you can't count the number of classical allusions in this, but this is a wonderful if one of the things mythology provides is etiology, that is an etiology, an account of origins. This is a wonderful one. It's historic and it's cosmic and it's psychological, all at the same time. It's also incredibly grotesque. It is incredibly, I mean, as I've said before, John Milton is really metal, and it doesn't get more metal than this passage. But we're going to have to fast forward through a lot of this book now. Paradise Lost Book 3 features God being like, yeah, I know, it's cool, it's all going to be fine. You know what, I'll give the summary of what leads us from Book 2 to Book 9 in the next video, and I'll post this one now.